There is something in nature which Jung called a-causal orderedness. For instance, all a priori facts in physics such as half-lives of atoms and the speed of light are a-causal orderedness. These cannot be causally explained, they can only be observed, but we can give no cause for them. In the psychic sphere, an a-causal orderedness can be found in the properties of the natural integers. The natural integers are a psychic content that just simply is the way it is. 5, for example, is a prime number. We cannot ask why 5 is a prime number. It is 1 and everyone can see that it is. In other words, our psychic intellectual processes are ordered in such a way that this strikes us as evident. We are so structured that we must see it this way. Perhaps on other planetary systems there is another psychic structure for which this is not the case. But for us it is, though we cannot account for this causally. The question why or where does that come from or what makes it that way appears to be meaningless. The properties of the natural integers are thus a psychic orderedness, as half-lives are a physical orderedness. Both are phenomena that Jung characterized by the concept a-causal orderedness, by which he meant an a priori order that we cannot account for in terms of cause and effect or probability. Thus, we have two phenomena. On the one hand, something like an a-causal orderedness seems to exist in the domain of both psychic and material reality, and on the other hand, sporadic, irregular synchronistic events occur. The a-causal orderedness is regular, generally determinable, universally valid, and observable at all times. By contrast, none of this is true for the sporadic cases of synchronicity. They are primarily characterized by their unexpected, irregular, unpredictable occurrence, but they also manifest a-causal orderedness. In this regard, Jung considered a hypothesis according to which synchronistic events, being sporadic miracles, were only a special case of the more general principle of a-causal orderedness. In fact, they are those special cases in which the observer is in a position to know the meaning in the simultaneity of the psychic and the physical events. Synchronistic events tends to take place when an archetype is intensively constellated in and around the observer. This is generally the case in pre-psychotic states, those hyperexcited states that people exhibit before a psychotic explosion. At such times, powerful basic archetypal levels of the psyche are always intensively constellated. Synchronistic events also take place in life's critical moments. But on no account should we regard the archetype as the cause of synchronistic events. To do so would be once again to think causally. It would be better to say that synchronicity is a special case of a-causal orderedness. Therefore, the archetype is the structure of an a priori psychic orderedness. If a synchronistic event associates itself with the archetype, that is, if something happens externally that fits in with its meaning, then that event follows the same basic pattern. That is, in this case, it is ordered in the same way. This kind of synchronistic orderedness, however, is distinct from the general a-causal orderedness, in that the latter happens with regularity, but the former does not. Rather, the former represents a unique act of creation in time. Here we come to the question of whether these archetypal structures have always existed and were in some way already present in the prime matter of the universe, or whether they only developed later. In Jung's view, the basic structures were always there, but within them ever new acts of creation are taking place. Jung came to the view that the archetype is something we can never get beyond. It is the ultimate, the most fundamental structure of our psychic beings, which we cannot transcend. However, within these archetypal patterns, acts of creation can take place. Synchronistic phenomena are thus acts of creation in time, of which Jung says in conclusion, we must of course guard against thinking of every event whose cause is unknown as acausal. This, as I have already stressed, is admissible only when a cause is not even thinkable. But thinkability is itself an idea that needs the most rigorous criticism. Had the atom corresponded to the original philosophical conception of it, its feasibility would be unthinkable. But once it proved to be a measurable quantity, its non-feasibility became unthinkable. Meaningful coincidences are thinkable as pure chance, but the more they multiply and the greater and more exact the correspondence of the event is, the more their probability sinks and their unthinkability increases, until they can no longer be regarded as pure chance, but for lack of a causal explanation, have to be thought of as meaningful arrangements. As I have already said, however, their inexplicability is due not to the fact that the cause is unknown, but to the fact that a cause cannot even be postulated in intellectual terms. This is necessarily the case when space and time lose their meaning or have become relative, for under those circumstances, a causality which presupposes space and time for its continuance can no longer be said to exist and becomes altogether unthinkable.